Passenger 127, sit down. You can't do anything. The shout echoed as F-22 fighters closed in on their aircraft. The captain panicked. They're not responding. They're preparing to force us down. In the chaotic cabin, a woman in a white blouse and long silk skirt stood up, her voice ice-cold. Open the backup channel for me. A single transmission crackled over the dead frequency. This is Viper. Outside, F-22s broke radio silence in unison. Viper, copy. Elena Cross, 30 years old, sat quietly in seat 127 near the back of the commercial airliner. Her slender frame was elegantly dressed in a crisp white silk blouse and a long flowing skirt that spoke of understated sophistication. Her long brown hair fell softly over her shoulders as she opened a worn leather wallet. From inside the wallet, she carefully withdrew a small silver badge, its surface dulled with age and handling. The military insignia had been worn smooth by years of touch, the engraved symbols barely visible after countless flights and missions. She stared at it for several seconds, her eyes distant with memories, then carefully tucked it back into the wallet's hidden compartment. The middle-aged businessman sitting next to her noticed the brief ritual and couldn't resist a smirk. "Souvenir?" he asked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Passenger 127 playing secret agent now?" Several other passengers within earshot chuckled at his observation. A woman across the aisle added her own commentary. "Probably bought it at some tourist shop. You know how these office types like to pretend they're mysterious." Elena said nothing in response to their mockery. She simply closed her wallet with deliberate care, placed it in her purse, and turned her gaze toward the small aircraft window. Her silence seemed to invite more ridicule from passengers who found entertainment in dismissing someone they saw as just another ordinary traveler. The businessman continued his commentary for the benefit of his fellow passengers. "Look at her trying to be all mysterious. Passenger 127 thinks she's in some spy movie." A small girl in the row ahead accidentally dropped her stuffed bear, which rolled toward Elena's feet. Without hesitation, Elena bent down gracefully, retrieved the toy, and returned it to the child with a gentle smile. The girl's mother nodded gratefully, but an elderly gentleman sitting diagonally across the aisle watched the interaction with more careful attention. Something in Elena's movements, the way she carried herself despite the mockery, caught his experienced eye. The whispered comments continued around her seat area. Passenger 127, acting all mysterious like she's somebody important. Elena remained composed, allowing the ridicule to wash over her while maintaining her dignified posture. To the casual observer, she appeared to be just another professional woman enduring an uncomfortable flight, perhaps someone easily intimidated by the aggressive comments of fellow passengers. But there was something in her stillness, in the way she held herself despite the verbal attacks, that suggested depths her critics couldn't imagine. The elderly gentleman continued watching, his instincts telling him that appearances could be deceiving. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with routine efficiency, checking seat belts and preparing for takeoff. Elena sat quietly through their safety demonstrations, occasionally glancing out her window with the practiced eye of someone who understood aviation far better than her appearance suggested. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, the businessman beside her made one final attempt at humor. "Hope passenger 127 doesn't pull out any more secret agent props. We might all have to take her seriously." The laughter that followed was cruel and dismissive, designed to make Elena feel small and insignificant. She absorbed it all without response, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her expression serene despite the hostile environment her fellow passengers had created around seat 127. The aircraft lifted off into clear skies, carrying its cargo of passengers who had no idea that one among them possessed skills and knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death in the right circumstances. The elderly gentleman, retired Air Force Colonel James Mitchell, later told reporters, "People were laughing at her, making jokes about passenger 127 playing dress-up. But the way she held that silver badge, like it was a piece of her soul. Only someone who truly belonged to the sky would handle military insignia with that kind of reverence." The violent explosion from the right engine shattered the peaceful afternoon flight like a bomb detonating in a cathedral. The aircraft lurched violently to the right, throwing passengers against their seatbelts and sending loose items flying through the cabin. Emergency oxygen masks deployed, dangling like yellow jellyfish while screams filled the air. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained with barely controlled panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost our primary radio communications. We're experiencing a complete electrical failure." The cabin lights flickered and died, leaving only the eerie glow of emergency lighting to illuminate the terrified faces of passengers who were beginning to understand that this was no ordinary mechanical problem. Through the small windows, passengers could see two F-22 Raptor fighters closing in on their aircraft with the predatory precision of military interceptors. The fighter jets positioned themselves on either side of the commercial airliner, their sleek forms a stark reminder that the damaged aircraft was now flying in restricted airspace without authorization. The captain's voice returned, now openly frightened. "The military aircraft are not responding to our emergency signals. They appear to be preparing to force us to land immediately." Panic erupted throughout the cabin. Children began crying. Adults prayed out loud or frantically tried to call loved ones on phones that showed no signal at cruising altitude. The smell of electrical smoke mixed with the sharp odor of fear-induced sweat. A burly construction worker pointed directly at Elena, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Passenger 127, sit down and shut up. This isn't the time for your secret agent fantasies. You can't do anything to help." His words triggered a cascade of similar comments from passengers who were looking for someone to blame for their terror. Elena became their target, the quiet woman who had dared to carry herself with dignity while they mocked her. Elena stood gracefully, smoothing her silk skirt and gathering her composure despite the violent turbulence that was throwing other passengers around like rag dolls. She moved carefully toward the rear of the cabin where the crew communication panel was located. A flight attendant immediately blocked her path, his training kicking in despite the emergency. "Ma'am, you absolutely cannot access that equipment. That's for crew members only. You're not authorized to use military communication frequencies." The businessman from her row shouted over the noise of failing engines and panicked passengers. "She's completely lost her mind. Passenger 127 thinks she can save us all. Someone stop her before she makes things worse." Elena reached into her purse and withdrew the worn silver badge, placing it carefully on the communication panel. Her voice cut through the chaos with a calm authority that seemed impossible given the circumstances. "Open the backup channel for me. Now." When no one moved to comply, Elena calmly began operating the communication equipment herself, her fingers moving over controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who had used military radio systems countless times before. She keyed the transmit button and spoke into the microphone with crystal-clear precision. "This is Viper. Passenger 127, requesting immediate communication with escort aircraft." The effect was instantaneous and stunning. The cabin fell completely silent except for the sound of failing engines and emergency alarms. Even the crying children seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. The response crackled over the aircraft's speaker system immediately. "Viper? Copy. Stand by for verification. Within seconds, another voice joined the frequency, this one carrying the unmistakable authority of NORAD command. All stations, hold current positions. Viper has operational control. The F-22 fighters, which had been maintaining aggressive intercept positions, suddenly changed their formation. Instead of forcing the damaged airliner down, they assumed protective escort positions, their wingtips aligned with mathematical precision. Passengers stared at Elena in shock and growing understanding. The woman they had mocked as Passenger 127 had just commanded the respect of the United States Air Force with a single radio transmission. The businessman who had led the mockery sat frozen in his seat, his face pale as he realized that he had been humiliating someone whose expertise far exceeded anything he could comprehend. Elena continued coordinating with the military aircraft, her voice remaining calm and professional despite the smoke filling the cabin and the multiple system failures threatening everyone aboard. She was no longer just Passenger 127. She was the voice of authority that was going to bring them home alive. The F-22 pilots responded to her instructions with the crisp professionalism of military personnel addressing a superior officer. Every command was acknowledged and executed without question or hesitation. Senior Flight Attendant Maria Rodriguez later testified, her white blouse was getting stained with smoke, and her silk skirt was wrinkled from the emergency. But when she said, "This is Viper," the entire fighter escort formation changed from hostile to protective. I've never seen anything like it in my 22 years of flying. The retention spike came when both F-22 fighters executed a synchronized wingtip salute, a gesture of respect typically reserved for fallen heroes or retiring generals. They were saluting Passenger 127, a woman in civilian clothes who had somehow earned their immediate and absolute respect. Military databases across the United States began processing the impossible. The call sign Viper was actively transmitting from a commercial airliner in distress. According to official records, Viper had been missing in action for 7 years, presumed dead after a classified mission that went catastrophically wrong. But here was that legendary voice, calm and authoritative, coordinating a complex emergency response from seat 127 of a damaged civilian aircraft. Elena Cross, still wearing her smoke-stained white blouse and wrinkled silk skirt, stood in the rear of the commercial airliner as if it were a military command center. Her voice carried across multiple radio frequencies, directing F-22 fighters, coordinating with NORAD command, and managing air traffic control in 3 different sectors simultaneously. The passengers who had spent the flight mocking Passenger 127 now watched in stunned silence as she demonstrated expertise that belonged in Pentagon briefing rooms, not economy-class seating. Maintain escort formation, Elena transmitted to the F-22s. Vector west 3 degrees. We're losing altitude but remaining in civilian corridor Sierra 7. Do not deviate from protective positioning. The fighter pilots responded with crisp military precision. Roger. Viper. Escort formation maintained. NORAD confirms civilian corridor protection. Inside the damaged airliner, Elena was fighting multiple emergencies simultaneously. The electrical failure had knocked out most navigation systems. The engine damage was causing progressive structural stress. And they were rapidly approaching the limits of how long the aircraft could remain airborne. But Elena's voice never showed stress or uncertainty. She calculated approach vectors in her head, adjusted for wind conditions, and provided course corrections that kept the aircraft away from populated areas while guiding it toward the safest possible emergency landing site. The businessman who had led the mockery throughout the flight sat trembling in his seat. watching Elena coordinate with military command as if she had been doing it her entire career. His cruel jokes about secret agent fantasies now seemed not just inappropriate, but deeply shameful. Other passengers began weeping, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization of how badly they had misjudged the woman who was now saving their lives. Children stopped crying when they heard Elena's calm voice over the intercom. Adults found themselves breathing easier despite the continuing emergency. Elena continued working, consulting notes she pulled from her wallet, the same wallet that contained the silver badge her fellow passengers had mocked. The notes contained navigation data, emergency frequencies, and tactical information that no civilian should have possessed. "NORAD, this is Viper," she transmitted. "Civilian aircraft has multiple system failures. Requesting priority approach to McCord with full emergency response. We'll need medical standby and fire suppression." The response came immediately. "Viper, you have absolute priority. All traffic is being diverted. Emergency crews are positioning. Welcome back to active status." The words "welcome back" carried implications that the passengers couldn't fully understand, but the tone of respect in every military voice made it clear that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Elena guided the F-22 escorts through a complex weather system, using tactical knowledge that came from years of classified missions and training that officially didn't exist. The fighter pilots followed her instructions without question, trusting her expertise completely. "Raptor 1, adjust heading 2 degrees north," Elena commanded. "Weather cell is moving faster than predicted. Maintain current altitude but prepare for moderate turbulence." The F-22 pilot responded instantly, "2 degrees north, Roger." "Viper, how did you know about the weather cell movement?" "Our instruments just picked it up." Elena's response was matter-of-fact. "Experience. Some things you learn from years of reading the sky that instruments can't teach you." As they approached McCord Air Force Base, Elena coordinated the emergency landing with the precision of someone who had done it dozens of times before. She managed multiple radio frequencies, calculated fuel consumption rates, and provided approach guidance that impressed even experienced air traffic controllers. The landing was rough but successful. The aircraft touched down hard, bounced twice, and skidded sideways as damaged landing gear struggled to maintain traction. But Elena's calculations had been perfect. They stopped just past the runway midpoint, well within safe parameters. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft immediately, but every passenger and crew member was alive and conscious. What should have been a catastrophic accident had become a successful emergency landing through Elena's expert coordination. As passengers began evacuating, the businessman from Elena's row approached her with tears streaming down his face. He dropped to his knees in the aircraft aisle, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice broken with shame and gratitude. "We mocked you. Called you Passenger 127 like it was an insult. We treated you like you were nobody. And you saved every one of us." Elena looked down at him with the same calm dignity she had maintained throughout the emergency. Her white blouse was torn and stained with smoke. Her silk skirt was wrinkled and dirty. But her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had faced death many times and emerged victorious. "Don't judge people by their appearance or their seat number," she said simply. "The sky doesn't care what clothes I'm wearing or where I'm sitting. It only listens to people who know how to speak its language." The elderly Air Force colonel who had watched her throughout the flight approached as other passengers filed past. "You're really her," he said quietly. "You're the Viper from the classified files. I thought you were dead." Elena's response was equally quiet. I was. For 7 years, I was dead. Today, I came back to life because people needed me to. NORAD made one final transmission that was heard by military personnel throughout the region. Viper, you are never forgotten. The words echoed through the aircraft as Elena gathered her purse and prepared to disappear back into civilian life, leaving behind passengers whose assumptions about ordinary people had been permanently shattered. Elena walked away from McCord Air Force Base that evening without speaking to the media crews that had assembled at the scene. She declined all requests for interviews, refused to pose for photographs, and ignored offers from book publishers and movie producers who wanted to tell her story. But news of Passenger 127 spread across social media and traditional news outlets like wildfire. Mystery Woman Forces, F-22s to break radio silence, became headline news on every major network. Aviation experts struggled to explain how someone with no apparent military credentials had commanded fighter aircraft and coordinated complex emergency procedures. Military veterans began sharing carefully worded stories about a legendary tactical coordinator known only as Viper, who had saved their units during classified operations that couldn't be discussed publicly even decades later. They spoke in vague terms about impossible rescue missions and emergency coordinations that had brought them home alive. The survivors of the emergency flight formed a support group they called the 127 Survivors, meeting regularly to process their experience and share memories of the day their lives were saved by someone they had dismissed and mocked. The little girl who had dropped her stuffed bear wrote in her school journal, "I'm still alive because the nice lady in seat 127 knew how to talk to the fighter planes." The elderly Air Force colonel became a frequent speaker at military leadership conferences, telling carefully sanitized versions of Elena's story to illustrate the importance of recognizing expertise regardless of how it was presented. The businessman who had led the mockery posted a viral video apology that was viewed millions of times. In the emotional confession, he broke down while acknowledging how his assumptions about gender, appearance, and civilian status had nearly prevented him from recognizing someone who would save his life. "I called her Passenger 127 like it was an insult," he said through tears. "I made jokes about her playing secret agent. I couldn't have been more wrong about another human being." Elena never responded to his apology directly, but the video sparked national conversations about unconscious bias, military service recognition, and the dangerous assumptions people make about fellow passengers based on seating assignments and appearance. Airport security personnel and flight crews began receiving enhanced training in recognizing hidden expertise among passengers during emergency situations. Elena's story became a case study in aviation safety courses, teaching staff to look beyond surface appearances when seeking help during crises. A civilian emergency coordination training program was established using Elena's techniques, teaching basic crisis communication skills to ordinary people who might find themselves in situations where conventional authority structures had failed. At McCord Air Force Base, a memorial plaque was installed near the main runway. "If you must ask who Viper is, you're not ready for the answer." The silver badge that Elena had carried, the one that passengers had assumed was a tourist souvenir, was revealed to be a classified military commendation that officially didn't exist in any public records. Military historians began researching the badge's significance, but most information remained sealed in classified files. Young women entering military service began requesting assignment to tactical coordination specialties, inspired by Elena's example of quiet competence and professional excellence under extreme pressure. Flight schools started emphasizing that true expertise doesn't announce itself with uniforms or rank insignia. Comment: Viper stands. If you believe there are silent heroes living among us, waiting for the moment when their skills might save lives. Elena returned to her quiet civilian life, declining all offers to return to active military duty or accept consulting positions with defense contractors. She refused to capitalize on her newfound fame or use the incident to build a public career in aviation or emergency management. Her only public statement came through a handwritten note released by a military attorney. Heroes don't need recognition or medals. They just need people to keep breathing. The white silk blouse and long skirt she had worn during the emergency were carefully cleaned and preserved in her closet, hanging as silent reminders of the day when her hidden expertise had saved 234 lives. She never spoke publicly about her military background or the classified missions that had earned her the legendary Viper designation. For the passengers who survived Flight 847, Elena's image remained permanently etched in their memories. A professional woman in civilian clothes, calmly commanding military aircraft, while everyone around her panicked in terror. The little girl who had dropped her stuffed bear grew up to become a military communications specialist. She kept Elena's photo in her duty station, telling colleagues, "I learned about service because I once saw passenger 127 make F-22 pilots salute from their cockpits." Military communication specialists began studying transcripts of Elena's radio coordination during the emergency, using her tactical decisions as training examples for managing complex multi-frequency operations under crisis conditions. Her methods became standard curriculum in advanced air traffic control and emergency coordination courses. At civilian flight training centers across the country, Elena's story became required reading for students learning emergency procedures and crisis leadership. The lesson wasn't about technical aviation skills. It was about recognizing that expertise can come from the most unexpected sources. The worn silver badge she had carried, dismissed by fellow passengers as a tourist trinket, inspired a new generation of military personnel to understand that true service often goes unrecognized and unrewarded. "Serve silently" became an unofficial motto among tactical coordinators who understood that the most important missions are the ones that never make headlines. Years later, when commercial flights encountered emergencies and military aircraft needed to coordinate civilian rescues, air traffic controllers would sometimes receive precise, professional guidance from unknown sources. Pilots would joke that, "Maybe Viper is still out there somewhere watching over us." Flight instructors teaching emergency procedures would conclude their lessons with Elena's story. Remember passenger 127. When everything is falling apart and everyone is panicking, someone needs to stay calm and take control. Someday, that someone might be sitting right next to you. Elena's legacy lived not in official recognition or public fame, but in changed attitudes about assumptions and stereotypes. Airport personnel began paying closer attention to passengers they might previously have overlooked. Airlines started asking different questions about hidden expertise among their customers. The most important lesson from Flight 847 wasn't about aviation or military coordination. It was about the profound danger of judging people based on their seat assignments, their clothing, or their apparent civilian status, instead of taking time to discover their actual knowledge and capabilities. Elena Cross, call sign Viper, had proven that extraordinary expertise doesn't require uniforms, rank insignia, or official recognition. Sometimes it sits quietly in seat 127, wearing civilian clothes and carrying memories that officially don't exist. In a world that judges people by their appearance, their profession, and their seating section, Elena's story served as a powerful reminder that the person who saves your life might be someone you dismissed as just another passenger. True expertise doesn't announce itself with fanfare or credentials. It waits quietly until the moment arrives when lives depend on knowledge, competence, and the courage to act when conventional authority fails. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.